Greetings, friends. This is Hamilcar with Hamilcar Gaming, and I'm here with the second installment on our series for our campaign Ecthrosis Awakens. And this is another character creation video. Linked at the end of the video, I'll have the character creation video we already established with the player Ken. But here I'm going to have another one of my players who's going to talk about his character creation process, and I'll ask him a couple questions to go through kind of establishing some of that depth and that extra thought process that I think really makes a character feel very, very interesting and also a lot of fun to play. So with that, here's Gray, and Gray, go ahead and tell our viewers a little bit about your character.
All right. Well, the character that I had in mind for playing is a extraordinarily cynical wizard werewolf.
Okay.
Who goes by the name Locke, and specializes in fire magic, and is incredibly stoic when in his typical state, and then occasionally turns feral.
Okay. I like it. I think that there's a lot of good stuff here to work with. So it's a good description of the character, and so I have a video talking about how different people can kind of come up with ideas for their characters, and I figured this would be a good object lesson where a lot of different players came to their character idea in different ways. Do you think you could explain a little bit about what research you did or where you started when you came up with the idea for Locke?
The idea started really talking with you about various various different creatures and things that appear in the D&D universe, and one of them was werewolves. And you mentioned that it could be were anything from like were sharks or whatever.
Were sponge is my favorite.
Were sponge.
The dreaded were sponge is a good one.
Oh no!
Have you thought about having Locke be the dreaded were sponge? I mean,
no, I haven't.
Okay,
No.
okay. Well, give it some serious thought.
Nothing with you is serious. But hearing that concept, I thought that it was an interesting thing to explore just the mechanic, really, of a duality of temperaments within the same character.
Okay.
And so I thought about how to have a character who, on one hand, is incredibly well thought out, very intentional, very intellectual, and high-minded in his approach, and closed off emotionally. And then on the other hand is all rage and bloodlust and melee attacks.
Okay, I like it. I think you and I have talked some about this, but I think it can be really fun to try and create that balance. And in a later video, I've got some ideas on how to maybe adjust the 5th edition rules to make this work as a character. I think it will be a lot of fun, and we may have a video a little later on that. But I think that's a real good foundation for the character. And so I know that when I explain kind of my process, I usually kind of started with personality. I would say that your process here is, in my video, what I coined kind of an archetype point of view, where you looked at here's the style of character, or here's some races or class combinations that you want to put together, and then the rest of the character you'd have to work on fleshing out some of those other details. So that kind of brings me into my second question. Have you put some thought into personality? And when I refer to personality, I really mean, how do you see yourself role-playing the character?
Like I said before, one of the things that interested me about this particular mechanic was the completely opposite natures. So on the one hand, since you have what is known to be a werewolf type character, what would then be the opposite of that? And that would be someone who is very stoic, very reserved, and I also mentioned before that he was incredibly cynical. And
not hard for you. No, I'm just kidding.
You always say that it's easiest to draw from yourself.
That's very true. That's very true. It's
Yes.
probably why I've always played those kind of silly characters.
Yes.
All right, well, back to Locke.
Yes. Back to Locke. And this kind of goes into his backstory a
Hmm.
little bit. So I started thinking about um, how would someone come? How did he become a werewolf, and how
Hmm.
did this happen? And so I came up with the backstory of him working for a kind of a sketchy scientist who is trying to investigate lycanthropy. And because I always like fire, and fire is a nice thing, I made this character very adept at fire, and
Hmm.
fire is good at handling dogs and wolves, and so I decided to have him be in charge of the handling the live test subjects for this scientist.
Okay.
And with that kind of, it just seemed to go hand in hand with this idea of, well, how is he okay with there being live test subjects and actual people when they aren't in a lycanthropic state, um, and that gave birth to this kind of the cynical worldview of um, all of modern progress is built upon suffering of some group.
Okay.
Yes, like I said, cynical.
Hmm.
Um, and then coming from that, the idea of, well, maybe he is the one who chooses to be who chooses which people are the test subjects, and so if people are going to have to suffer for this ultimate progress of whatever science is coming from it, at least he gets to choose those who deserve it.
Okay.
Um, and so that, yeah, and that was the starting point for it, and from there, I've kind of fleshed out larger backstory sort of things. So,
Okay. Well, it moves
yeah,
really well into what would be my third question, which kind of goes into background and origin. But I really coined the question as motivation. And I think that all these kind of things go together. So,
okay.
why is Locke an adventurer? What in his backstory, what in his origin, what in his temperament would make him want to do something other than continue being a scientist or a scientific assistant
Right,
in whatever urban setting you chose for him.
right. Um, so, I was thinking, coming from an upper middle class society, uh, in which he kind of goes against his parents' wishes, kind of not outright rebellion, but kind of some butting heads there, and they push him into studying magic. And so he kind of regards it almost as those piano lessons that everybody had to take from their parents. Yeah, um,
Getting a little bit too close to home there.
that actually wasn't me. That was my brother. Um, but he does take to it, and he very much takes toward the fire aspects of it and
Hmm.
enjoys that. Also, at the same time, he starts to fall in with kind of a rougher crowd. His one of his best friends is kind of from a rougher area of neighborhood, and they get into a little bit of trouble together. And it's through this friend that he is introduced to the questionable scientist and gets the job as the wolf handler. And it's the scientist who explains and tries to justify his work through the cynical worldview, and that kind of leaks into him a bit.
Okay.
And then
So,
at some
did you mention already the test subjects? Where are they from?
um, at this point, they would be from convicted criminals.
Okay, I think you mentioned that.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so he said, "Oh yeah, convicted criminals. Of course they deserve it." But then his friend, through you know unfortunate circumstances and crowds, gets killed in some sort of spat um, that he is not at fault for.
Okay.
And so Locke tries to bring this to the authorities' attention, but it's regarded just as a matter of, oh, it's gang violence, or something like this. Maybe even locking up
Mm,
some of his other friends who were involved because, hey, they were involved in a crime, instead of actually investigating the murder of this friend. Uh, at which point he becomes very disillusioned with the justice system in place, and decides that he is the one who knows best who deserves the place in these tests, since he doesn't any longer trust that these convicted criminals are actually criminal enough
mhm.
to deserve it. And so he arranges to go out and start on his own collecting people and bringing them back,
Mm. Okay.
taking it down a bit toward a darker path. Um, and eventually, this leads to his employer considering him something of a loose cannon, or maybe a liability, and literally throws him to the wolves.
I see. So he kind of, because of being failed by the justice system, goes a bit down a vigilante path.
Yes,
And that ends up causing conflict with the scientist that he was employed by.
yes. And so he's betrayed by the scientist, and he is infected, but through however many years or however long he was working with these people and being able to observe who was able to resist the change more than others, he is able to stave it off long enough to survive and to burn the whole place to the ground with his adeption at fire magic.
Okay.
Then seeing himself as both a danger and an outcast, since there are certainly people who would kill lycanthropes on sight, he just ups and leaves, um, and takes his sense of vigilantism with him,
Okay.
wanting to continue to, find people who are taking advantage of their place of power and killing them.
All right. Well, one thing that I do want to mention, and I think I've mentioned it before with other character setups, and just something that's really useful for a game master is when a player has a very interesting and dynamic background. And I think that you've given a lot here because as a game master, there's a lot of elements that I could use to try and pull your character in different ways during the campaign with an emotional response. It seems that there's enough bad blood or emotion that even though Locke is in his normal form, not necessarily his werewolf form, is more calm, collected, and cynical, that there are some powerful options there as a game master.
Yes.
And one of the reasons I really like that players take the time to do this activity of figuring out what I consider to be this depth in their character is that not only should it be more fun for you to play, but it's more fun for the GM to do some planning and things that they can to not necessarily decide the directions of your choices, but to really push the characters toward that growth that we'll talk about later, and make the characters really question their principles and be dynamic, be interesting characters. Well, the next thing that I usually go into, and this could be a little more details, and it may not take very long, is as most of us know when it comes to interesting characters, that it's not always the character that is always strong and overpowered and things like that isn't very interesting. What actually is interesting is the balance of strengths and flaws. And so I don't know if you've thought about. I think some of your back history leads to some rather I don't say obvious, but there are some things there that could be pulled from it. But I'll go ahead and let you voice what you've thought about as some of the strengths and flaws for Locke.
Well, first of all, in terms of strength, I think that he is very um, capable and independent on his own.
Mm-hmm.
He's capable of looking out for himself. He was both raised in a decent society, but spent a lot of time slumming in the streets. Um, I I think that he's very like I've said before, very collected, very thought out.
Hmm.
In most cases, he isn't one to be pushed by emotions,
Hmm.
or at least he tries very hard not to be, and that gets into the weaknesses because the more emotional he becomes, the less control he has over his change.
Okay.
Um, Also, kind of in with, I'm not really sure if it's a strength or a weakness, but um, I know, like, personally for me, the whole thing about um, vigilantism, that comes from my own feelings of wanting to, like, be able to do something as people who are really scum of the earth,
Yeah.
until I realized that well, they're people too, and so I just removed that last part. No
Hmm.
more moral dilemma there.
There we go. Well,
Um,
and that can lead to something fun for GMs because on the opposite side of that, sometimes there are established constabulary for a reason, and
yes,
vigilantism
yes,
is a two-sided coin, and so I
right.
really like that can give that sort of that's a great example of something that can both be a strength and a flaw at the same time. It really depends on the way you perceive it.
And so something that both makes my blood boil and seen as like what I see as one of the most unforgivable acts, with child trafficking, is something that would also translate to him,
Mm-hmm.
and shake him out of whatever routine he is currently going through, and they really push him down the path of anger
Mm-hmm.
and fire and teeth and blood.
Okay.
As for weaknesses, um, he is very much a loner. He doesn't like working with other people, both from like being just not having good people skills in the past, and to combined with the fact that if other people are around when he turns, there's a good chance that he would hurt them as well.
Mm.
Um, and he's also uh, kind of prideful in his own capabilities.
Okay.
I don't need anybody else. I can do this on my own. Just leave me be, sort of thing.
Okay, so with those foundations of some strengths and some flaws, the fifth question I usually ask, and that I think is often not always thought about. Sometimes players will expect that it'll just kind of happen, or that it's this is the game master's job. But I really do believe that it can add a lot of enjoyment and fun to a character. Is to think about growth. So if you've got this concept where you've talked about motivation and strengths and weaknesses, that in my mind gives a good picture of the present day state of your character of Locke.
Mm-hmm.
But growth would be, how do you see that Locke could change, and what are maybe some of the triggers that might push him to different directions? Whether it's a fall from grace, or maybe pushing back against some of those flaws, and some of it maybe I'll see when it happens,
Yeah.
but I think it's always helpful to think about those things because then you're able to jump on those when you see the opportunities in a campaign.
Mm-hmm. One of the main things that I was thinking of was in relation to his very cynical view of the world, of seeing even acts and systems of good as being ultimately for one's own benefit. And so if he can meeting people who are genuinely altruistic, I think could confuse him at first,
Mm-hmm.
and lead to something more. I think I don't know if he himself could be completely altruistic, um, but as a path of growth, perhaps move more uh, from a point of punishing those who do evil to protecting those who do good.
Okay.
Because I think that that is a very uh, kind of a subtle but very important distinction in actions. Um, in terms of pride, um, the like you said, a potential fall from grace, which I think for him would be pretty devastating. And so after that, maybe a rise again, from being in a very dark position,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then potentially um, moving to be more of a team player. Something that struck me as a thought that struck me as interesting is that if he himself is very walled off and alone, but wolves are pack animals.
Hmm.
So perhaps if there was ever some way to get past the blood rage or the lack of control, then maybe that could be linked to something. I don't know.
Okay. No, I like this. I like this a lot. And I think that that everyone, as they go through a campaign, that this concept of growth, and actually I would even say your current motivations and things like that, will evolve and change, and that you'll come up with even more ideas. But I think it's a really good start. Some really good ideas for growth. So this is the hardest question, and sometimes it's something that changes throughout a character's play experience. But sometimes I think it helps me sometimes, and it can also help others to kind of capsulate a bit about your character. And this actually comes from the Dresden Files games. It's something I'm kind of porting over because I really liked it. But it's the idea of a high concept. So the idea is that if you could say in a phrase or a short sentence that would encapsulate your character, and this could be, it can describe some of what his capabilities are, but also his demeanor, his motivation. You may not be able to encapsulate all of it in one phrase, and oftentimes
We can make it a run-on sentence.
I know, but
Those things go
oftentimes when I choose high concepts, I usually go with some sort of humor because that's one of my outlets. But I understand if you want something a little bit more serious. But I don't know if you give any thought to that, and that's fine if you haven't. I just think for me, it's always kind of helped a bit to encapsulate my thought about a character.
Yeah, actually. I know that among your different ways of making characters, you also have building a character from a theme, which isn't how I've arrived at mine. But after thinking about it and trying to think of, oh, well, if he was in this situation, what would he do? And what if things were like this? And all that, which I eventually decided I really didn't want to get into all the details of. I decided to, act, pretty much just from that part of me, the vengeful part without the humanity,
Mm-hmm.
and decide, based just how I would decide, but under the idea of, it was, I prey on those who prey on the weak.
Okay, I like it.
So, yeah.
Prey on those who prey on the weak. Good deal. Well, the last little bit, and I think I told this to Ken, is one of the events that I want to do after everyone in our group has kind of figured out their character is that I'm going to have an event where everyone comes up with kind of an adventure or a story hook, and then we're going to pass around those story hooks and kind of do what I call a foundation event, where everyone will add in a little bit of information about how they all meet each other. So it doesn't have to be very detailed, but and I don't expect to have an answer now, but just something to think about that in the next few weeks as everyone else starts to get their character together, to try and think about that as something you move forward on, and then hopefully when we actually do that event, you'll have something interesting for us.
Yeah.
The last thing would be that when we're ready, we'll go ahead and have a follow-up video to this that goes through actual character sheet choices that have to do with based on the foundation of your character here. And we're a little delayed on it because I want to work with you on some ideas that I have about how to
Yeah.
do this wizard to werewolf thing. I think it'll be
Yes.
really cool, but we'll definitely want to sit down and do that together. So
Yeah.
there'll probably be an extra part to this a little later. We're probably wearing different clothes, but we'll go ahead and have a follow
Maybe.
up. Maybe
Maybe
this
not.
is my favorite shirt, so we'll go ahead and have that follow up video with that extra information. Well, Grady, do you have anything else that you want to tell our viewers?
I don't think so. Not at this point. All of my other ideas are getting down into more specifics of
Okay.
the character, which we can go over later.
Well, I'm real excited to do this role playing stuff, and thank you for your insights and your time and all of your research on this character. I think we're gonna have a good time in this campaign.
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks for watching, everyone. Bye.